All right, welcome back. I just wanted to just discuss some of my thoughts on the election last night because holy cow, it was unlike anything I think any of us were expecting. If you tuned into my video, I kind of showed what I thought the election would look like. And yeah, it was based on like some blogs that I've been reading, Split Ticket, Elections Daily, Sabados Crystal Ball. These are all really great, but who boy, things did not turn out that way. And so, I've been going through a lot of thoughts the last 24 hours. Mainly, I've been busy with schoolwork, but I've also been thinking about the results last night. I kind of stayed up until about a little before midnight, but I think last night's results, I think, are a vindication for what I think I and what many of us, I think, are hoping for, and that's normalcy. We just want politicians to, essentially, cut the nonsense and just ignore the extremes and just get back to work and do the work for the American people that they desperately need. Like stop, campaigning on these divisive issues and actually talk about and actually do stuff that will help ordinary Americans. And this hardcore partisanship that we're seeing, the back and forth and just the nastiness and the violent rhetoric. Americans sent a message saying stop. And this is not just for Republicans, this is actually for Democrats too. Democrats in New York had a much closer than expected race, and I'm not sure where things stand in Oregon at the moment. I think they're going to take a while to count, but that's also pretty close. So at least on the state level, um, there were several governors who were dominant in states who were sent a message by the voters telling them to essentially just cut the nonsense and actually, govern competently. And I think that in many ways, I hope that politicians actually take that to heart. Um, so it does appear that Tina Kotek, the Democrat, has won the governor's race in Oregon, but it was closer than expected. So, that just playing into that, Kathy Hochul also only won by a few points in New York. So the hyper partisans did not do too well. The members of the squad did not do too well. Summer Lee, I think, ran significantly behind John Fetterman in Pennsylvania, and more moderate candidates like Josh Shapiro ran well ahead of her. And that was true, in a bunch of other places as well. Um, and the worst members of Congress, if they didn't lose, they were given a real scare. Like Lauren Boebert, that one's looking like it looked last night that she lost, but now it's looking really close and that she actually might win in the end. Joe Kent in Washington, who's this god awful candidate who unseated Jamie Herrera Butler, he might lose. Still, there's like a third of the vote to count. Some areas that are favorable to him will come in. So, but at the very least, he's been given a real scare. So the worst candidates appear to have suffered, and that's great. And same thing with Secretary of State races, where election deniers were running in like 5 different battleground states. Um, so in 3 of them, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Minnesota, the election deniers have lost. In Arizona, they are losing. And in Nevada, they are currently leading, but I don't expect that to hold based on the results. Um, it's not all good news, though. It does appear, at least from what I'm seeing, that it's possible that Carrie Lake, who's expected to win the governor's race, despite being an unrepentant election denier, she might actually pull out the win. She's trailing at the moment. As I'm recording this, we're expecting a drop from Maricopa County that's expected to be favorable to Carrie Lake, but I haven't seen it yet as of the time I'm recording this. But on the whole, the election deniers lost, or they won in states where it doesn't matter because they're already going to vote Republican anyway, like Indiana, Wyoming. I think there were some pretty awful candidates that were elected there, but they'll be contained hopefully. And like in Wyoming, for example, the legislature, there's talk that they might strip the Secretary of State of its election oversight powers because the new Secretary of State is an election denier, but it's Wyoming. It's not a state that Democrats are going to be competitive in anyway. So I think that in some ways, the craziness of the last 6 years, this is like vindication for those of us who wanted to see something go back to normal. And I think even though I am pro-life, I think I would be lying if I didn't say that Dobbs did play a role. I know there's this whole back and forth going on in my feed. People who are pro-life are insisting that Dobbs did not play a role, and this is just an excuse for Republicans who don't want to do soul searching. I know Alexander DeSantis said this, but I think it did play a role. I think if you look at who showed up and like the issues that were at play based on the polling and sort of where Democrats won and where Republicans won. Like Republicans did well in New York where abortion rights have been settled in favor of abortion rights, but they've faltered almost everywhere else. Like Florida was the one place where you could say Republicans had a big red wave, but almost across anywhere where abortion rights are actually on the line and where pro-life activists actually have a chance at a victory, Republicans suffered. And I think we have to remember that when Roe v. Wade was decided back in 1973, this was a big major legal victory for the pro-choice side. But what followed was a nearly endless string of pro-life victories, at the ballot box and at the state level and also at the congressional level as well. And so with the Dobbs decision being the crowning achievement for the pro-life movement, I think the tables, have turned. I think the pro-life movement really does need to brace for huge defeats in the next several years, or else, we got to focus on the demand side. We've done a pretty good in getting those laws passed that helps address the supply of abortion, but we've done nothing to address the demand. And it seems like no one in the movement is interested. Like the pro-life movement, in my opinion, has become very insular, and there seems to be no interest in continuing the next step now that Roe v. Wade has been overturned, which is reducing the demand for abortion. And I think that there should be bipartisan support for that, but there doesn't seem to be the will for that. And as a result, I think the pro-life movement is going to suffer more defeats like the ones last night. So I think we got to be ready for that. So I think Dobbs did play a role. It's maybe the role, it was a bit overblown, but I think it did play a role. The other thought that's on my mind is how candidate quality matters. People, I think, rely too much on the fundamentals in their analysis, and a lot of my friends like Rachel Bitecofer are firmly of the opinion that you look at the fundamentals and turnout and it's all that matters, but candidate quality does matter. And I think that was vindicated last night with you had Hung Hsiao in a Virginia seat, who was a really good candidate who overperformed by like double digits in a Biden plus 18 seat. You had Jim Bonet in Pennsylvania, who was considered to be a lackluster candidate, who lost a Trump plus 3 seat. You had J.R. Majewski similarly, who was a bad candidate, who also lost, I think, quite heftily in a Trump plus 3 seat. So, sorry about that. Candidate quality does matter. And I really hope both parties realize this, particularly the Republicans, for whom candidate quality was a real issue this cycle. And it's quite possible that they will not get their filibuster-proof majority in 2025, largely because of candidate quality, particularly with Dr. Oz and Blake Masters and Herschel Walker, possibly, maybe. We'll have to see about that. That's going to be decided in a month. But the candidate quality issues may have cost Republicans 2 or 3 seats. We know Pennsylvania went to the Democrats, which is, again, I was not expecting that in the end. but that was because I think Republicans could have nominated a better candidate. And also I think candidate quality also has another effect in Ohio, where I think despite the Republican win, candidate quality was on the Democratic side, and it forced Republicans to spend more in that seat in what they should have won going away. So candidate quality does matter, and I think it did potentially decide the outcome of, you know, 2 or 3 different Senate races and a lot of different House races. And so, and a lot of that is the fault of Donald Trump, who endorsed a lot of these candidates. And that leads me to the next point, where I think we've got to, Republicans in particular, I think, need to move on from Donald Trump. But, you know, particularly with Republican leadership, this was a disappointing election for Republicans by any metric. It was the best election, the best midterm election for the party in power in 20 years. So Republican leadership needs to ask why this happened. Heads probably need to roll. And we got to start with the guy at the top, Donald Trump, who's already angling to be the Republican nominee for president. And he's already been going after people who might challenge him, like Ron DeSantis, who won that thumping victory in Florida last night, and who many would hope that would be the alternative to Trump. Personally, I'd like to see if there maybe could be other alternatives to Trump, but certainly there is one viable alternative. But again, I hope to see more. But either way, we need to move on from this guy, and we also need to move on from other spent forces like Stacey Abrams and Beto O'Rourke, who did well in 2018, did less well in this year. I think it's time for the torch to be passed to the next slate of candidates. You know, if you've run and lost twice, you know, maybe that's it. Maybe you'll get it a third time, but maybe it's better to go with someone else. And so I think new ideas, fresh faces, I think that would be on the whole a great thing. So I am all in favor of moving on from the people at the top. And, you know, particularly, you know, Kevin McCarthy, I'm going to come back to him because he's not, I don't think he's going to be looking forward to the next 2 years. Control of the House is actually, I don't know if we're going to know for a few weeks which way the House goes. I think Republicans are going to end up winning, but, you know, this is going to come down to some seats in California, which they take forever to count. So as a result, this is election month. And so maybe other states would like to take a note from Florida, which managed to count nearly all of its ballots by midnight. Maybe Florida's doing something right in terms of counting elections. I know that my friend Jenya Coulter, who's a poll worker there, she runs a great operation in her precinct. You know, Florida, I think, really runs a mean operation in terms of counting votes. You know, regardless of how you feel about the politics of Florida, they're good at counting votes. And so maybe states like California, Arizona, which are going to take a few days or a few weeks to count, Nevada, maybe they ought to take a page out of Florida. But finally, I think that, but anyway, back to what I was saying before, which is that Kevin McCarthy is probably not looking forward to having a narrow majority in the House, because we saw what happened the last 2 years, where Nancy Pelosi had to govern with a 5-seat majority and was beholden to the more extreme members of the House. And that may have worked against her, to be very honest, in this election. And Kevin McCarthy is going to have to deal with the same thing. Luckily enough for him, the majority that he's managed to cobble together, if that happens, is reliant on a bunch of gains in New York, which means maybe there are more moderate members who'll be able to anchor the GOP more. It also might mean that, you know, Republicans made promises to impeach Biden and members of his administration. This comes back to the whole normalcy thing. Maybe Republicans are having second thoughts about that. Maybe this gives them pause about that. But again, maybe the more extreme members who appeared maybe have edged out victories will have a tougher hand in McCarthy. And McCarthy's already sort of been playing to the right wing of the party. So, you know, maybe they'll have a stronger hand if he absolutely needs their votes. But then again, the moderates, you know, also strengthen their hands in places like New York and New Jersey, possibly even California. So we'll have to see what the actual makeup of the House is before we can um, see what happens. But it is looking like Republicans might get just barely what they need in the House and possibly the Senate. Senate is still up in the air. If either if Arizona, I think, is still up in the air, but I think Democrats are going to win that. So Republicans have to win Nevada. If Democrats win Nevada, it's likely lights out for Mitch McConnell in the Senate majority. So, but if either Nevada or Arizona goes red, then it's going to come down to the runoff in Georgia. So this ain't over by any stretch. We're going to have to just wait for the process to play itself out, and then we'll have to see what happens. But finally, my last thought is that Democrats should not overinterpret the mandate that they have been given. In 2020, in 2018, 2020, and 2022, the people basically sent a message saying, enough. We just want things to go back to normal. This sort of full circle, in terms of what I was talking about at the beginning. Voters want the games, the show, the BS. They want it to stop. They just want a party that will be inoffensive and that will, return to a sense of normalcy, return to a sense of when people respected one another, and return to like a party that just gets things done incrementally and with incremental change rather than sudden change. So I think that Democrats really need to maybe back down maybe a bit on the woke stuff. I think that may have cost them a bit of support that they otherwise would have had, and focus more on bread and butter issues. Talk about substantive issues like issues of freedom and issues of economics, and just maybe start talking to people. And this goes to the Republicans too. Start talking to people that you don't talk to usually, to people who don't agree with you. We need to start talking to each other again, and we need to start hearing each other out, and we need to start respecting one another. Like, most Americans who disagree with us are not our enemies. They are our friends, they are our neighbors, they are our family members, siblings, parents, grandparents. So I think we need to start talking to each other again. And I think that this is sort of the election that sort of told us that, that's something that I think our politicians need to do, is something that we need to do as individuals, as everyday citizens. Be respectful in the way we in the way we talk to one another. Tone down the rhetoric. This violent rhetoric that almost led to the husband of the Speaker of the House getting having that injury. We need to tone this down, and we need to just get back to where things used to be. And so hopefully that'll happen. We'll have to see what ends up happening over the next year. Maybe things will actually turn out for the better. I mean, going into this election, I was really dreading this whole thing. Like, it had gotten exhausting. And I think most American voters also got tired of it. So I'm hoping maybe there's a course correction, and that, maybe we start talking to each other like human beings, like adults, like normal people. One can only hope. Anyway, thanks so much for listening. These are sort of cobbled together thoughts, but I hope I can add my 2 cents on what happened last night, because it's certainly a fascinating election. So see you guys later.